welcome, and it's a pleasure to be the first speaker today. Now, I'm talking about deterrence, which obviously will include the Rwanda policy, so I have to admit that since this slideshow was done, everything's changed. If I can. Now, looking predominantly at proactive deterrence rather than reactive. What I mean by that are proactive ones are policies designed to make people think we don't want to come to a country, rather than reactive, which are things like pushbacks, which prevent people actually accessing the land of territory of a country. And the first thing to say is, if anyone wants to slope off quickly, skipping to the end, deterrents don't work. And that's not actually that controversial to say. Even those who are the most opposed to asylum systems will, when it comes down to it, admit that deterrents don't work. They're a political rather than a practical measure. Now, there's a difference in view of how that can go. Some people will say that it should go further with deterrence. But as it stands with what we have at the moment, we're very clear that they're just not working anywhere, not just in the UK. Numbers change. And being honest, numbers change for a huge amount of reasons, particularly the weather. And that is the single biggest factor when it comes to channel crossings, is the weather. Can't be escaped. But the patterns don't really change that much. We look at when the National Open Borders Act was passed, we look at when the Illegal Migration Act was passed, and you can see that they didn't really stop people wanting to come to the UK on channel crossings. We see the increases at the same periods, the same patterns, despite the legislation. And one of the main reasons for that is most people coming to the UK don't know the laws of the UK. Most people coming seeking asylum in any country don't know the asylum laws of that country. It's not surprising. We look at some of our MPs and they don't know the asylum laws of that country. They're complicated. People aren't looking at that. They're looking at where they feel safe. And that same pattern is reflected globally. In the EU, last year, there were 355,300 irregular crossings. That's the highest number since 2016. Now you compare that with the fact that apparently since 2005 to 2023, there was nearly a 14,000% increase in the EU border security budget. So we're seeing a very clear thing that these policies just aren't putting people off, they aren't deterring. But that's not something that politicians want to do here, because they want to be able to show they're doing something. And whether or not that thing works is a different matter. It's whether or not it grabs headlines. Statistically, people choose the country in which they're going to seek safety for two main reasons. They've got existing ties here. Family, language, community ties. That is why they're coming. They're not coming because they love the sunshine of the UK or they think we've got the best weather or the food. They're coming because they have some tangible reason that they think this is why I'm going to be safe. And safety is very different from asylum. And that's something that does get skipped over on this. The reasons that people feel safe in a country are personal. They're subjective. We all hear the things about, well, France is a safe country. France is a safe country for many people. But if you've just fled war and persecution, and you're looking over your shoulder, you're going somewhere where you can trust that there's someone you can rely on, where you can communicate your needs effectively. So language is important, ties with you. That feeling of safety comes before the system of regularising it with asylum. So what does that mean? Well, it means that if you seek some safety somewhere and you can't seek asylum, you're still going to come. You're just not going to have a regularised status with that. You're going to become undocumented most likely. You'll go underground into your communities. And we'll discuss that in a second. Because I realise I'm going through this and speaking far too fast, so I'm going to waffle on this. What do the deterrent policies actually do though? And what do they mean? Well, first one, the Illegal Migration Act. Stated purpose of the Act, I'm going to be really boring and read it out here. Prevent and deter unlawful migration, and in particular migration by unsafe and illegal routes, by requiring the removal from the United Kingdom of certain persons who enter or arrive in the United Kingdom in breach of immigration control. That's worked spectacularly well, as we've all seen over the last few months. The problem, the Legal Immigration Act is an awkward one to talk about in particular, because it's not fully implemented at the moment. And that's one of the main reasons the government says, well, once it's fully implemented, then it will act as a deterrent. They can't fully implement it, so they can't use it as a deterrent. And this is where the presentation comes out of date, in as much as only this week, the Belfast High Court ruled the Illegal Immigration Act was incompatible and unlawful due to its contradictions with human rights, which would undermine the Good Friday Agreement if we contravene the European Convention. Since it passed, we've seen an increase in the number of people detained and accommodated by the Home Office. Now, there's an argument to be made about whether or not we've seen decreases or increases in the asylum backlog. That is more about where numbers are and where people are put on spreadsheets, because we're also seeing an increase in numbers being withdrawn, and often for just people not being able to attend appointments. But if you're actually looking at the physical number of people, we're still seeing an increase. The restrictions on processing claims don't stop people coming to the country. They don't stop them needing accommodation. They don't stop them being detained. They stop the numbers on a spreadsheet that the government can say, this is how many figures we've got. But in person, rather than on paper, we are still seeing people coming. And that, let's be honest, one of the arguments here is cost. And that is increasing costs quite dramatically. We've seen the Home Office having to ask for more money because these costs are going up. And those costs are not helped by deterrent policies, which actually increase them, as we'll come to with the Rwanda Act in a second. Now these figures, I won't read through all of these ones, you'll be pleased to hear, aren't exactly accurate. They were the estimates from the Refugee Council, but the pattern is absolutely correct. Since the Illegal Migration Act, we have seen more people having to be accommodated. We're seeing the use of alternative accommodations, such as the Baby Stop. We're seeing costs rising. Because if you're not processing claims, you are sticking people in limbo. They're still coming, but you've just got nowhere for them. And next up, the Safety of Rwanda Act, which seems to change on a daily basis at the moment, so apologies if this part's out of date. But the idea is that it decrees that Rwanda is a safe country. It's an interesting way to do it, despite all the evidence. But that is a debatable thing for a different presentation. It hasn't stopped people coming. The day after the Rwanda Act passed, we saw deaths in the jungle. People are still going to come because they're still seeking safety here. What we're doing is spending about $500 million, about £10 on an act that can't possibly remove everybody who is coming. The actual, even if it works, even if you say, look, we're going to send people, the numbers that you would need to remove do not equate to the numbers who are still fostered despite this act being in place. So what are the real world implications? Well, we're seeing a shifting of routes for irregular entry. There's been an increase going back to the use of lorries. We're seeing Spain to Portsmouth for trafficking of Albanians increasing. We're seeing increased risks of exploitation. Between January and March of this year, there was a 9% increase compared to the same period last year of referrals to the NRM, National Referral Mechanism. So we are seeing exploitation of modern slavery actually increasing. And part of the reason for that is because not only are people not able to get asylum status and not able to become documented, which puts them in more precarious positions, but what we see is traffickers actually saying, if you try and escape, if you go to the authorities, you'll be removed to Rwanda. So there is more impetus for them, there's more threat for the traffickers to be able to say, if you try and escape from us, you're going to be in a worse position. So they can exploit people for longer. Increased cost of the taxpayers, as I said. You've still got to house people, you've still got to accommodate them, you've still got to feed them. You're just not processing claims. And detention costs a lot of money. Never mistake that. Detention is, a few years ago, it was about £100 a day, and those costs have been going up since. Weakening of human rights in general. Now, this is a contentious one, I do admit, but when you are putting in deterrence policies, fundamentally you are saying that some people's rights can be changed. can be weakened in order for that act to go through. And that is what the Rwanda Act does, in effect. It says that some people's rights are secondary to others. Now, when you start weakening human rights, that doesn't tend to work out well in the historically of grand scheme of things. So you have that risk. There's lots of respect on the international stage, and we see this quite often with different events, G7 and things like that, but also in smaller groupings. The UK has become, I spoke to a colleague who works for the European Commission, he said, it's like that kid at a party who just wants to show you their latest present and everybody else wants to move on to the dance floor. It's, right, we've got other things to do, and all we're doing is talk about legal migration. And that's starting to annoy other people. So we're losing respect. And fundamentally, it is undermining the international refugee regime. We're seeing, in order for things to go through, we have to violate key points of the international refugee regime, which risks other countries following suit. And we've seen this with the Illegal Migration Act, where other countries were saying, well, if the UK can do that, we can do that. These were countries which tended not to have a great track record on human rights in the first place, so didn't look good for everybody else, and actually increased refugee flows from those countries. Sudan's one of the main ones, but obviously Sudan has other reasons at the moment for why there's increased refugees from them. This, though, is the key point. Deterrence increase exploitation. And we see this time and time again. You know, someone who needs to seek safety. They've got ties with the country of safety. They lack the means to seek asylum and have that safety regularised, which means they have to rely on gangs. Those gangs are the ones who will get into the country, offer them employment. They then can't go to the authorities, so they're forced further underground. If they escape, they risk deportation. Now, a perfect example of this was the Albanian return agreement. Albanians trafficked into the UK, they escape, they seek assistance, they then were moved back to Albania, the country they've just been trafficked from, where the gangs were operating from. Doesn't take a huge amount of thought to realise what happens next. They end up being forced to rely on the gangs again, or being caught by the gangs again, which increases the traffic. So the exploitation escalates. And when I say escalates, when we're looking at Albanians, for example, if you stand back and the gangs think that you have said something to the authorities, reported, your situation is worsened. So you're in an even worse situation than you were the first time round that you were trafficked. And people who are trafficked are statistically more likely to be trafficked again. They are a higher risk group of trafficking than someone who hasn't been trafficked previously. And this is what the implications are. We see new routes, record number of potential victims of modern slavery, human trafficking cases skyrocketing. These are all demonstrable points. So what do we need? Well, we do need to reduce dangerous crossings. I think anybody in this room would argue that we want to see people risking their lives to seek asylum. But we need policies which recognise the drivers of migration and the personal reasons that people seek safety in particular countries. There's no point saying we're going to stop people without looking at why they're coming to the country in the first place. And this is universal, this isn't just the UK. We need to invest in our own asylum system. The UK asylum system costs a fortune. We can all be honest on that one. It is vastly expensive. But the majority of the cost is on accommodation, deterrence and deportation. If you invest in processing claims, which we have stopped because of the Illegal Migration Act, people move out to accommodation, they can get right to work faster, and we can look at ways to do that. Right to work, by the way, is a perfect example of policy that can benefit in this. It's estimated that it would increase about £1.3 billion in tax revenue, £6.7 billion in reduced government expenditure. So combined, £8 billion. Or about 3 times the amount the actual asylum system on its own costs at the moment. So you can have a self-funding system and make a profit. Create safer and simpler means to seek asylum. We all pay safer legal routes. As a refugee sector, we used to use safe and legal routes as a catchphrase. It's more complicated than sometimes we like to make out, and the phrase has now been co-opted almost to be government-approved routes. We need to make it safer and simpler. That is things like removing carrier liability points, so people can fly into Heathrow and apply for asylum at point of port of entry without having to fly to towns. But they're complicated, and we shouldn't oversimplify. We need to make that clear. We need to focus on gains, not on victims. And that is a major thing we are not doing at the moment. My former colleague showed me this morning, actually, the list of Google alerts that she has of Albanians who are being prosecuted for activities carried out while they're trafficked. That doesn't stop the gangs, they're going to get somebody else in. But it does mean that we're prosecuting victims, not the known people. And we need to ensure we've got adherence to international law and human rights. Without that, we start to lose the very essence of why we're doing this, what the purpose is, which is to provide safety to people who need it. And I'll leave on a final thought on this. If you take nothing else away from this, and there's a lot of other great speeches coming up, so there's a lot of information to take in today. One of the key ways that we know deterrents don't work, because people know that they're going to be risking their lives. They might not know the asylum laws of the country they're moving to, most don't. They do know that they've lost something. They know that people, their families have lost somebody, friends. We are seeing deaths skyrocket. This year we've seen a 450% increase in deaths in China. That is despite passing the Illegal Migration Act and the National Borders Act. If death isn't a deterrent, then absolutely nothing else is. So, thank you very much.